Welcome to Imagining Bridges to Better Leadership, the podcast where we explore how to strengthen teams, enhance communication, and elevate leadership skills in organizations just like yours. Each week, you'll gain actionable tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you create thriving teams and sharpen your leadership skills. Now here's your host, Dr. K.D. Neal, ready to guide you on the path to better leadership.
I'll conquer mountains, cross the sea. Nothing is impossible, just believe. With creativity as my guide, I'll achieve.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. K.D. Neal, and I'm with the Imagining Bridges to Better Leadership podcast. Today, we have an exciting guest, an amazing guest. He's an award-winning, internationally acclaimed jazz vocalist and lyricist, Sweet Lu Olutosin. His music has been seeing many bright moments, including reaching number 1 on the Billboard Traditional Jazz Album charts. He's retired colonel at U.S. Army National Guard and a former Atlanta police officer. He recently obtained his citizenship in Ghana, so he's dual citizenship in Ghana and the United States. Help me welcome to the podcast, Baba Lu Olutosin.
Hey,
Hey, Baba Lu, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me, Kevin, and thanks for spending a little time and actually doing a great introduction for me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Before we get started, I want you to just take 30 seconds to tell me what you love about Baba Lu. What are some of the things that really make Baba Lu Baba Lu?
Wow, that's a big question. And I have to go back to the very beginning, because without the beginning, there's no present and there's no future or anything else. What is really important to me, and it's something that's very dear to me, is being a part of something that's much bigger than me and I'm talking now about my family, because my family was very, very instrumental in me not taking the paths that many other people do take that lead them to, maybe less desirable outcomes. My family was a big part in why I ended up, I guess, kind of on the right side of the road, because it could have gone very differently at any time.
Right.
But having good guidance, good leadership, and good grounding allowed me to not get swept up by the environmental changes that are always current in the African American community.
Right. Now, you mentioned having good leadership, and this is the Imagining Bridges to Better Leadership podcast. So tell me about that leadership in your life.
Okay, good. I will. And I come to it now, having gone through and performed various leadership activities, through a military. But I saw leadership way before I ever got to the military in my family upbringing, and in that of my father in particularly, having not a great deal of education. As a matter of fact, a very small amount of education, but being very intellectual, if you will, educated himself, and thereby educating himself, he shared his education with brothers and sisters and my siblings as we were coming up. And it was probably more instructional, given the fact that my dad didn't have full operating capacity of all of his faculties. He at one time was a quadriplegic, pretty much. And because of that, you would think that maybe there are lots of dark areas that he wouldn't address, because physically he didn't have the kind of acumen that most people normally have. But he never shied away from it. He addressed everything, regardless of his physical condition. And
Right.
And I know it was a lot of the upbringing that he had. And we're talking about people who come from very little in terms of means, or in terms of even freedoms, because when we go back as far as my dad and further, those African Americans had very, very little in terms of freedoms
Mhm.
as compared to today. But
Right.
what they did have was a spirit that connected them to each other, and it connected them to a future that they envisioned for themselves.
Mhm.
Even if they weren't going to get that future, they were
Mhm.
envisioning the future for their children and
Right.
making sure that the children were lined up on the right kind of azimuths, if you will, to get them to a place of safety, because
Mhm.
that was a big concern for Black people at that time in America,
Right.
safety.
Mhm.
So everything that they were doing was preparing their children and their communities for things that will be better one day, because
Right.
that day they weren't very good.
Mhm. Now you mentioned that your father didn't have a lot of education, um, but how he led you and your family. There's a saying that uh, often more is caught than taught.
Hmm.
So you catch a lot of things through the life of people, more so than them actually sitting down and instructing you in certain things.
Yeah.
So we do catch a lot of things, even though the person may not have the academic acumen, as you mentioned. Um, they have a a leadership um, warehouse, I guess you could say, that instructs us in the way that they live, in the way that they do things. So tell me about what is the biggest need for leaders in this society. What do you think it is?
Well, understanding.
Understanding.
And that's where it really all begins. Understanding the landscape that you now stand upon as a leader, or
Hmm.
even as a subordinate.
Hmm.
You have to understand the environment that you're in order to make the best decision that you could possibly make.
Hmm.
And that means that it's not all going to come to you. Everything doesn't just come to you and say, hey, here I am, deal with me.
Hmm.
But you still have to deal with it, whether or not it announced itself at the door or not.
Right.
Circumstances and situations appear, and they're
Hmm.
there, and they're there to be dealt with. You can either see them and deal with it, or you can not see them and let it deal with you. But it's going
Right.
to be addressed one way or another.
Hmm.
So I think the very first thing that leaders have to do and have to be is aware of the true circumstances that they're facing. Now, that's very important when you look at the lives that we live here in the West or in America, because what's presented is not what's true. Almost,
Okay.
I won't say 100% of the time, but a very, very high percentage of the time. And it starts at the very beginning of who we are as Americans. We've been
Hmm.
told a million different things about the goodness and the greatness and all of the forthright steps that our forefathers took to create this great country, how it was settled. And we've been given stories about how the West or our forefathers dealt with the indigenous people that inhabited this land when we came here. We've been given all kinds of miscommunications and confusion surrounding who we are, which causes us not to have a true understanding of the circumstances we face. So as I
Okay.
mentioned, that there are things that are going to be dealt with whether you acknowledge them or not. A lot
Hmm.
of the turmoil and the turbulence that we have socially in our communities and in our society is because of these hidden and confusing types of narratives that have been spun hundreds of years. I mean, at the very beginning of the country. So
Okay.
those, and we take in and we start building on them as if they're true.
Hmm.
And we, in our mentally, we felt that they're true because it's what we were told at such an early age. And, often when you're young, you don't question enough, or you question to a point, and then if you don't get the answer, you figure, well, I just won't get it, and you move on. So
Okay.
I'll leave you with that.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned how things are here in the United States and in the West. And as I mentioned in your introduction, you are also a Ghanaian citizen now.
Yes, I am.
And I kind of want to get into that. But um, as a Ghanaian citizen, um, how did how did your leadership take you to Ghana in order to? I mean, because I'm assuming that none of your family is there in Ghana. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So how as a leader did you find yourself going to Ghana and becoming a citizen of Ghana?
That's a good question as well. Um, all of my life, I've been on a search of one type or another for identity and for connection. And I think it may be something that it's similar with many other African Americans or Africans in the diaspora,
Mm.
because there's the unknown.
Right.
When you have the kind of histories that we have, you've lost a lot between the time of where you would have been born
Mm.
had circumstance not been what they are, and the time that you are born. And specifically when you talk in Africa, you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of years of tradition and culture existed long before there were ever any Europeans, before there were ever any Caucasians, before there were ever anything other than melanated people.
Hmm.
So we have thousands and thousands of years of tradition and culture that is actually encoded in our DNA on some level that we end up kind of drifting towards as African Americans. We don't realize what it is, but it's in our DNA. So therefore, when you now try and find that, it's difficult because there's so much of a void between where your original bloodline starts and
Hmm.
where you find yourself. And all of that has been intentional to create that void, because if we don't know who we are, we continue to search.
Right.
And as
Right.
long as you're searching, you are not in your purpose. You're searching for where to line up on that purpose.
Right. Right.
So as long as you're searching, you're circling, and you're not at your full power, which
Right.
in the situation of Africans in the diaspora
Hmm.
works to the advantage of the oppressor.
Yeah. Now, one thing, and that's very interesting that you talk about how we are searching for our identity. Um, One thing that I teach this wherever I go. I do coaching and leadership training. But one thing that I always try to impress to people is that if you don't know and embrace your own story, your whole story, you become an extra in somebody else's story.
Absolutely.
And that is something that is common to all of us. When we don't embrace who we are, and if we don't know who we are, we can't embrace who we are.
Exactly.
And all of our stories have good, bad, ugly, and we have to embrace all of that
Mhm.
because that made us who we are. When we don't embrace it, most of us, especially living in this social media uh, type of society where we're judged by how many likes we get and how many people follow us. When we have this kind of society that it's so built upon these um, false narratives, because social media only shows you the highlight reel of our lives.
Yeah.
We don't really get into the deep thing, but we're so caught up into that when we don't embrace all the bad stuff, the ugly stuff, and make that a part of our story, realizing that that made us who we are. We end up being a part of somebody else's story, and we end up not writing our own story.
Yeah. I think you really told the narrative of the larger percentage of Africans in the diaspora, specifically African Americans.
Mhm.
It's, if you look at our existence in this in the West, it's as if we have forgotten that we have a home that we've come from.
Mhm.
It's almost as if you said, "Hey, I like it over here. It's pretty cool."
Mhm.
You know, maybe they don't treat us as well as they should, but it's still pretty cool. And by the way, I don't even remember what it was like to live any other way than this. And that's all very true. However, what we left that we never experienced is so much greater than what we experience today. And we have no idea that we have rights and that we have ownership to the greatest paradise on the planet.
Right.
Literally the greatest paradise on the planet. But we're stuck over here in a mindset that keeps us longing, but not to longing to the point of taking action. It's as if we've gotten a certain level of comfort
Yes.
in our oppression. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, we're oppressed. Yeah, things aren't right, but I can get used to this, and I have gotten used to it, so it'll be okay. And we dumbed ourselves down into believing that this is the best we can do. The best we can do is not sitting over here in comfort, in shade. You don't grow there. If you look at any big, bold leafed tree, you will always see up under that tree a space that where the shade has completely blocked growth of anything green. But it's shady. It's a nice place to be on a hot day. You go sit under that shade tree and man, it's beautiful. But nothing ever grows in the shade.
Right.
And here in America, we are in the shade. And we've gotten comfortable. And we don't want to leave the shade because it's uncomfortable, but we will never grow unless we leave the shade. We'll stay right where we are.
And that's an important thing when we're speaking of leadership. Leaders must grow. You find a lot of leaders who are comfortable and they don't grow. They don't allow themselves to. And there's a book on 15 laws of leadership, 15 laws of growth. I'm sorry, and it talks about there's different levels of growth, and one of the things is the law of the lid, and it talks about how there's a lid on a leader. Those who follow him will never be able to get higher than where he is. And unless he decides to grow, those who are following him, if they want to grow, they're going to have to go to somewhere else and find a place where they can grow. And that goes along with what you were saying about being in the place of comfort. You can't grow there, so you're going to have to go somewhere where you can grow. Now we can really discuss this for several episodes, but let's move on a little bit here. I want to talk about how your earlier career choices lead you to where you are right now.
Wow, that's a really good question there. I can address it several ways, but let me first come to it from a psychic standpoint.
Okay.
I'm not a psychic by any means, but I have visited and I continue to visit with psychics for intuition and for insight. This particular time, I went to see a psychic, and as psychics do, they look and they do whatever they do. But her message was, I see 3 past life regressions as I'm looking at you right now. I see where you've been. I see where you've been. In one life, you were a preacher. And in one life, you were a musician or an entertainer. And in the other life, you were a soldier. And it looks as if you, in this life that you're living now, have decided that you're going to put all 3 of those things together in one lifetime. And when she said that, I was like, wow, wait a minute. Now, mind you, preaching, no. That I would never say I'm a preacher, and nor would I be one. But preachers deliver messages. Right. preachers deliver sermons. Now, I wouldn't say what I say or do is a sermon, but it's certainly a message. It's always a message. And I went in the military right out of high school, ended up staying longer than I had intended to. By the time it was all over, I'd made 06 colonel and performed some pretty good details or good duties over the time frame, combat and all of that good stuff. So yeah, that was the soldier piece of this. I'm also a lyricist and a singer and a recording artist, which is the entertainment aspect of that life regression that the psychic told me about, and also finally the leader. So I've done all of those things in this lifestyle or this lifetime. So, and since we know that we are energy beings and energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transmuted into different forms.
Right.
I suppose the next time I return in human form, maybe I'll be all three plus one more thing. I don't know. That's, for another day. But for this time, I've enjoyed everything that I've been able to accomplish, and I want to accomplish much more in the time that I have left.
Okay. That's really shines a light on who you are as a person, as well as your career. I want to ask along those same lines, what career mistake has given you the biggest lesson?
Career mistake. I thought about that one, and I really couldn't come to a good, solid answer on that. I mean, I've had plenty of mistakes. Life is a series of mistakes.
Right.
But I have always looked at the mistakes as negative only if you didn't learn the lesson from them.
Absolutely.
So I look at it as you go through life, you're going to get hit in the stomach, hit in the mouth, hit in the head with a brick. All kind of things are going to happen to you because that's life.
Right.
So your job is to deal with it. And in every event, there is a lesson. You may see that there's nothing good that could possibly come from this thing that you're having to deal with. But in there is a lesson. You may have to dig in it to get to the lesson. And it may take you a long time to finally get there. But if you get the lesson, then however bad that was, it was a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing.
Yeah.
Because you got the lesson. Now,
I believe that.
When you go through these terrible events and you don't get the lesson, yeah, that's a mistake. The mistake was you not getting the lesson that the Creator had put in front of you for you to learn from. So when you don't learn, you get to do that lesson all over again.
Right.
So more heartache is going to come for you just to teach you that lesson again. But if you don't get it then, don't worry, it'll be back. So the thing is to learn the lessons that are put in front of you every time, if you can. Now that's the tall order for every time, but you've got to be on it trying to get the lesson. And when you're trying to get the lesson, the pain is not nearly as much.
Right.
It's still painful, but that that's part of the process that you're going through to be a better person on the other side.
Right. And it's better.
Go ahead.
And it's better to learn that lesson the first time than to have to go through it over and over again.
It most certainly is. Because here's the thing, and I learned this the hard way. If you don't get the lesson the first time, when it comes back, it's going to be compound. It's going to. So say last time it was a 2-pound hammer. This time it's going to be a 10-pound hammer.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it at the 10-pound hammer, next time it's going to be a 12-pound hammer. And it's and it's going to come back.
Right.
And you're going to deal with it one way or the other. Either you're going to learn from it, or you're just going to have a whole lot of pain.
Right. Now you seem like you are at a place now where you realize and recognize your calling, what you've been called to do. But when was it what time frame was it that you really recognized that this is where I am, this is where what I'm called to do, this is my calling in life?
Wow. And you got some good questions. That is one that has really actually occurred over the last few years. And I kind of hate to say that, because that means I guess I'm just a dumb behind that's really very slow. But I'm here now.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look back, I look at all the things that I've done, and there's a long list of occupations: police officer, construction worker. I was a laborer for a brick mason, busboy at restaurants, military life, just lots of different things that I've done. But no matter how I look at all those things, I know that when I add them all up, they were all really leading me to the place I am now.
Right.
When I look at it, and I told you about the psychic, when I look at the various things that I've done, and I've really put my heart into trying to move forward in them, each one of them, by the time I got to the end of it, it was clear that this has been a chapter in a book, and that it's time for it to close it and move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So as I've gone through the military, the law enforcement, the construction stuff, the busboy, all of that, the singing, the performing, and all of that, it's all brought me to where I actually began, which is receiving information and stories and knowledge at the foot of my father, who received that information and knowledge at the foot of his mother and his grandmother. And it goes all the way back. So when you really come full circle, it really is a circle for me. Because now I've realized that my great grandmother was actually a griot, even though she was existing in a time and in a land that knew nothing about griots. She was performing, and this goes back to what I spoke to earlier. She was performing out of energy in her DNA. And that same energy made it to my grandmother and my father and to me through those paths that I just talked about. But I had to go all the way around the world to realize this is where I should have been from the very beginning. I had to know all those things and have those experiences and come back to now see what was most important from the very beginning, that I overlooked, that I paid no attention, that I didn't even believe. And when I went to Africa for the first time of my own volition, all that came into being as I was given an African name, an African griot name at that, and connected with the spirit of the griot ancestor who had spoken and been a storyteller for so many years, hundreds of years before I ever showed up. But I'm connected to that. I'm connected to it on the spirit side in the motherland, and I'm also connected to it on the natural side here in the West with my great grandmother. So it's it's a full circle kind of moment that I just got to a few years ago.
Okay. And I think that no matter when you come to the place, when you receive that epiphany, no matter when it is in life, it's never too late. Right. As long as you're breathing, it's the right time. Yeah. One of the last things I want to ask you, and we're closing out here, but I want to find out what does success look like to you, and how does one achieve it?
Well, I'll have to give you a broad view, because I view things from a broad perspective, and that's, I think, just part of who I am. Success to me is when every man, every woman, every child can live in their own light with without oppression from another group, another individual, another government. When there's freedom for everyone, that is success. And we're not there yet. By no means. We are not even close to being there. But I'm seeing some forces aligning over the globe that are forces of change. And I see change coming.
That's a great answer.
Hopefully I'll still be here when it comes. But if I'm not, it's still good. It's still change. It's still the change that we all need. So I'm going to say a prayer for that and try to usher that in.
That's a great answer. And I'll be saying a prayer for it as well. Last thing, how can listeners contact you for more information?
Okay. For more information, you can reach me online at my website is Storify Life. That's STORIFI.LIFE. Storify Life. And at the Storify Life platform, the program is one to coach, mentor, and teach the art of storytelling. And we're having some really good success with it. Some of our members have come into the community and really not had an idea of which way to go, but they knew they had a story to tell. And this gave them the opportunity, the tools to format the story, the coaching from the community that tells people, hey, look, that was really good. Why don't you try that? Or, various inputs to help them create their best story. And that is, I think, a labor of love that I'm doing, and I appreciate for all its many inputs.
That's great. That's great. That's Storify.life.
Yes.
We're looking forward to hearing more from Storify.life, and I'm sure it's going to be a great success. Well, this has been a great conversation with Baba Lu Olutosin. And again, we are so glad that he was able to share with us on today and look forward to hearing more from him in the future. As I close out, I'm going to close out with my saying that I will share with you on each episode. The secret to success is not doing the right things, but becoming the right person, the real you. Join me in becoming someone better. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Imagining Bridges to Better Leadership. We hope today's episode gave you valuable insights and strategies to strengthen your leadership and build better connections. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with other leaders who are ready to transform their teams and communication. Until next time, keep building bridges and creating better leadership in every connection you make.